what you'll see here is Gareth has been listening to all of the wonderful presentations during this week. And you'll see that his presentation is all about how can we independently verify and monitor what is actually going on the ground with regards to some of these resources. So with that, Gareth, over to yourself.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rose, also for organising such a great conference. What great content. So pleased to be here sharing mine with you all. So, we all know from what we've heard and listened to this week that ESG sentiment is a growing driver for the natural resources sector to ensure more sustainable practices, better environmental, social, ethical performance all round throughout the entire supply chain. To increase transparency and traceability. And if ESG is serious, then this means thorough due diligence required by all stakeholders. That's investors, regulators, NGOs, even the communities themselves, everyone who's involved. And due diligence requires data and information, which right now primarily comes from reporting and disclosures directly from the companies themselves. So what I want to talk about today is an often missing component. How do we independently and objectively verify what's being reported? What options are there? And it's not easy when you're talking about something like mining and natural resources. It's a complex, globally distributed production and supply chains. Where the production happens is often in remote locations, and where the demand is elsewhere in the world, and then the investment and the finance again somewhere else. So often you have a danger of out of sight, out of mind, and a lot of the issues we've heard about, such as artisanal mining, etc., all of these things can be happening out of view from those who are looking for ESG metrics to drive their investments and decision making, etc. So what can we do about that? How can we create objective sources of information for a global problem, essentially? Well, Ronald Reagan famously quoted the Russian proverb back in the 1980s, "Trust but verify," when speaking about nuclear disarmament. And this could equally be applied today to this ESG reporting and data from companies. And at the time in the 80s, this actually fostered an era of spy satellites, US military spy satellites, to verify what disarmament efforts were actually happening versus what was being reported. So taking that sentiment, fast forwarding 30 odd years to today, many people don't realize is that we have just undergone a new civilian and commercial space revolution. As you can see from my chart here, from around 2014 onwards, there has been a huge increase in satellites, low cost, commercial and civilian grade satellites being launched into space, hundreds in fact. So, and Earth observing satellites and sensing satellites. So we now have hundreds of these sensors buzzing around the Earth, providing us with a daily deluge of data, which gives us a new information source in a sort of unprecedented supply that we've never had before. And that's giving us petabytes of satellite imagery and sensing data per year, per satellite, which is actually an incredible step change. So that's giving us daily, weekly, monthly, objective, truly objective observations to help monitor, map, and routinely understand and even help manage environmental, social, and operational risks through time and space. Hopefully you can see a moving animation here, which actually the now very well-known incident at Brumadinho. We have an archive going back a few years and going forwards in time, being updated almost daily, and the volume of data is increasing. And this can be used for all sorts of applications, some of which have been spoken about throughout this week, particularly with small-scale and artisanal mining activity. That's a big use case. We can start to track these things objectively and independently. Tailings, storage facility status, live risk assessments almost of what's happening with the environment, and growing communities and settlements that are previously unmapped around mine sites. And there is a lot of data coming from these satellites. So you could have every single mine in a portfolio being mapped for a single company, or an investment fund, a pension fund, all of its assets that they invest into being mapped and monitored on an almost daily basis to spot risks happening and evolving, and check on what's actually being reported, what's said to be done, is it being done? So this is almost like CCTV of, from space, of what's going on. The reporting is like evidence, written evidence provided, and this is objective CCTV of what's going on. And it's not just images like you've just seen, photographs, satellite aerial photographs. There is a whole array of sensors and satellites that have sprung up in the last few years, radar satellites that can see through clouds in cloudy regions, and even get through forest canopies. They're already in use in, not enough, frankly, in the mining sector to monitor slope stability and subsidence using the radar technology from space. Optical imaging satellites have just shown great for land use and topographic mapping. Even laser ranging satellites that measure topographic terrain, shape and morphology, and also biomass. Thermal satellites look at wildfires, flaring of gases, etc., and even gas sensing itself to see invisible emissions, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, not just carbon dioxide, crucially methane, and other powerful greenhouse gases that often seem to get overlooked with the obsession with carbon dioxide. So there's a lot of sensing, raw sensing data, and that needs to all be brought together and made sense of. That's the key challenge now. The data is available, it's there, and it's coming thick and fast. So at Terrabotics, that's what we do. We take that data, what we call this new Earth Observation 2.0 era. We've moved away from the military era into a commercial era with abundance of low cost and free, in fact, data at source in many cases coming from the European Space Agency and NASA. We combine that with many other technologies, artificial intelligence, computer vision, lots of compute, and knowledge of the mining sector and the energy sector that we operate in to try and create solutions that actually make sense of this data. So this diagram here, for instance, runs from left to right. Left is what I've just described, all of that raw imagery and sensing data, but it does need to be made sense of and turned into actionable, sensible metrics or reports that people can use on the ground. And that's a chain of events where that data has to be turned into something meaningful and useful. And this is just a few little examples. Tailings dam identification. You often hear about monitoring tailings dams, but there's a lot of tailings dams out there. People don't even know they exist, old tailings dams that present a risk. So even finding them in the first place is the challenge globally. So many opportunities from satellite-based systems that are there, always on, always around the Earth, collecting data for us that we can then transform into useful information. So let me give you a quick case study of how this is actually being applied in practice. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar, I'm sure it's been mentioned throughout the week, with initiatives, investor-driven initiatives, such as the Tailing Safety Initiative that was driven by the Pensions Board of the Church of England and the Council of Ethics of Swedish National Pension Funds. So they have driven disclosures, forced mining companies, in fact, within the last year to disclose the location of their tailings dams around the world. And as you can see from their portal, they have a couple of thousand, a few thousand by now actually, of disclosures of tailings dams. But this is all disclosed and reported. So this is all from those companies that did respond to the demands for disclosures and then reported. Now, if you're serious about ESG, you should verify that too. So this is something we've actually been working on and involved in this initiative for Terrabotics. So the points you see on this map are some of those disclosures that have already been given today of tailings dams around the world. And as you can see, there's a huge array spread around the world. It's probably quite surprising to see the spread of them. That's only a fraction of what's there. So with satellite data, that gives us the opportunity to actually go and verify first, are those in the right location? So we have built a system and are continuing to build a system that trawls through terabytes and terabytes of satellite imagery through time and space, and using artificial intelligence methods is trained to spot and identify dam structures associated with mines, tailings storage facilities. And actually first start by verify what's being disclosed. Like for instance, a quick example here, location given at some point around the mining facility, but not actually the location of the tailings storage facilities themselves. And that's quite critical, because in the risk assessment, if that's going to potentially breach or flood, where's that going? We need to know the location, and that location in relation to local communities, population centers, environment, etc. We have another example here in Canada, up to the right, a facility that wasn't disclosed and isn't in the database that we've found, and Zambia again. So it doesn't really matter whether it's Canada or Africa. We're finding evidence of non-disclosures, incorrect disclosures, inaccuracies. And this is quite a big effort, and we're trawling through all of this satellite data to verify this. And this is enabled by this just becoming available in the last couple of years, all of this satellite imagery. So as a sort of deeper dive example as well, I wanted to share. So these disclosures that have been forced by this initiative, this is just one example from one of the companies. They have complied and declared what they've got, and gone through check. And I want to draw your attention to number 17. Has a formal analysis of the downstream impact on communities, ecosystems, etc. been done? Yes, done in 2005. Great, tick. ESG investor, great, move on, done. But what if we actually go and try and verify that and see what's going on at the site itself? So with archive of satellite data going back years and years, and also going forwards into the future, we can actually assess the reality. And in this particular mine with which that disclosure relates to, that 2005 risk assessment related to this green area of the community on the left that has since doubled, at least, almost quadrupled in size, the population center that we've tracked through satellites up to 2019, when we actually started this study. In relation to the tailings facilities that are actually mapped and we have the correct location for them. But the risk assessment done in 2005, as you can see, is no longer representative of the real risks to the community and even the environment around it. So with the satellite data and the analysis of that, we can actually start to highlight these things, verify them, but also update that information and share that with both all the stakeholders, the companies themselves. This was actually done itself by, this was motivated and sponsored by the company itself, this piece of work. And so sort of as another analogy and a nice example, I think, but switching to the energy sector very quickly, I will just play this and hopefully it will come through while I speak. So I mentioned earlier we have satellites that can detect gas flaring, see gas emissions. such as methane, as well as carbon dioxide, etc. And so we're able to monitor regularly through time what individual companies are doing. And here, this example, we're looking at West Texas in the US, and this was actually motivated by some New York hedge funds who, with ESG motivations, they're getting that demand from their customers to make more ESG compliant investments, to actually rank companies by how much flaring they're doing, gas flaring that they're doing in the oil field out in West Texas, and compare that to what's actually declared. And so there are state declarations. This is the black dotted line here. And then the grey line behind, the actual summation of all the companies involved in this area of interest, showing what's actually happened. And we see actually reasonable fits and a few big deviations, which allows us to investigate further and also understand which companies are involved in that and create essentially a league table. So it's a new, interesting times when we can actually provide this level of scrutiny and transparency. So I think I can sum up there, actually. So trust, but verify. So we now have tools and Earth observation satellites and the analysis that has to accompany them to transform it into useful information is one tool that helps do more thorough due diligence and verification. If the ESG community, all stakeholders are serious about this, then this data is actually available. It's available now, and it can be used, and it increasingly is being used, to create new levels of transparency and traceability for all, and help everybody up their game and raise the bar for the industry. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Gareth. A massive round of applause for all of us around the world. And thank you for putting up your, your glorious videos again. That's brilliant. Just by way of time, so you've got lots of questions that have come in from the different streams, along with lots of comments, and just to read some of them out at the moment. So quote from one person on WhatsApp: "This is absolutely insane, the stuff he's showing, wow," through to, and this comes from Ludovine, who many of you will remember gave a brilliant talk on the first day of the conference, especially around the governance area. And what Ludovine has said is, decision makers simply cannot claim ignorance as a defense anymore. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Gareth, in closing.
Yes, I would just like to say, actually, is there's a nice little complement to that. The name Escondida, as you see in the bottom right, is actually means the hidden one, but yeah, not anymore with this sort of data. You know, it's in the Andes or in the sort of Central Africa or wherever. But, you know, the data's there and it's available. It's free at source. The raw data, it's available and often, you know, costs less than a business class flight, for instance, to, you know, somewhere on the other side of the world. So certainly that's a true sentiment.
Brilliant, thanks, Gareth. And just in closing, are you seeing, I mean, if I was in the world of finance or investing, or wanting to make sure that my ethical investment fund truly was ethical, I'd be using this. Are you seeing massive pull from the investment side?
Yeah, we've seen an interesting chain of events, actually, and I think you can't sort of understate the impact of things like, I mentioned, the tailings dam initiative instigated by the Church of England, so pension funds and other pension funds, and those similar groupings have done the same in the energy sector for transition to new energies and away from hydrocarbons. And we have seen the force of that investor pressure come through the companies, where the companies themselves have then come to the likes of us and asked for help with verifying what they're reporting to add extra credibility to their reporting. And that surprised us even because of the speed with which that happened, from the announcement of things like these transitions to new energy initiatives and the tailings initiative. but that had a very quick knock-on effect within months, weeks even. Whereas if you think regulation takes years to have an effect and be discussed and go through the process, this sort of impact investor pressure, we've been sort of pleasantly surprised by that. So that's forced the companies to act, which is great. There's sort of good actors there. And then also, yes, from the actual investors themselves, there's, I think, a very mixed bag there currently. I think with sort of ESG metrics and things as well in general, I don't think there's an established marketplace there yet. That and ESG is still a small portion in the investment world, that they're not like established buyers or used to, frankly, putting their hand in their pocket to pay for this sort of stuff, you know, despite running very large pension funds with sort of billions and billions and trillions under management. So, yeah, it's often low cost data in itself, and there's the capital there to make it happen if the will is there.
Brilliant. So with that, thank you very, very much, Gareth. So another round of applause from those of us on the other side of the microphones.